Most people don't really grasp how long eternity lasts, often confusing it with infinity. But my own experience showed me that eternity lasted exactly 15 years, 2 months, 27 days, and some strange hours. It ended just like it began, with my wife Karen locking eyes with her partner and sharing a passionate kiss. The only difference was, this time, I wasn't the one she was kissing. The first time it happened was when I proposed to her, asking her to be mine forever as I gave her an engagement ring. Fast forward to a different setting, and there I was, just a bystander in a restaurant 2 towns over from our home. I watched as Karen and her new lover exchanged loving glances and leaned in for a passionate kiss. The specifics of how I ended up at the same restaurant are beside the point. It was clear they chose a location an hour away from home to stay discreet. Initially, I was curious, but my emotions quickly shifted from curiosity to shock, disgust, and anger as the scene unfolded. I briefly considered confronting them, but I was raised never to hit a woman, so I just sat there in stunned silence. They were so engrossed in each other, feeling safe that no one who knew them would see, and they leisurely enjoyed their meal, occasionally engaging in a kissing game. I ate slowly, had dessert, and kept observing them, my emotions swinging between rage and helplessness. When they finished their meal, they stood up, held hands, and left. Seated there in silent fury, I felt like the biggest fool. I had been married to Karen for over 14 years, with 2 exclusive years before that, yet I never suspected she swung both ways. She had never shown any interest in another woman, never dropping a hint in any of our conversations. I had foolishly believed I knew her inside and out, imagining we would grow old together. The revelation of her bisexuality was overshadowed by my anger at her blatant infidelity, regardless of the gender of her partner. She had diverted her love, betraying the commitment we made many years ago when she accepted my ring, symbolizing an eternity that felt timeless. Who knew some eternities had an expiration date? Settling the bill, I got into my car and drove home slowly, lost in thought. Karen hadn't expected me back early from my trip, but I had resolved all issues ahead of schedule, so I headed home on Friday evening instead of Saturday afternoon as planned. I had been away since Monday morning, and besides missing Karen and the kids, the lack of intimacy for more than 3 consecutive days had left me with pent-up energy, at least until I saw what happened in the restaurant. I was an hour from our hometown and could have driven straight through, but since I was ahead of schedule, I decided to stop for dinner as a break from driving, and the rest, as they say, is history. Our kids are 12 and 10, old enough to be left alone for an evening if Karen wanted to go out, which I had no issue with. However, I wondered if they knew about the situation, as neither had mentioned anything unusual. Perhaps they were as in the dark as I had been. Regardless, I knew they wouldn't be happy with what happened next. On the drive home, I engaged in the usual self-analysis. What did I do wrong? How long had it been going on? At least I didn't have to worry about her lover having a larger manhood than me. I chuckled to myself, gallows humor. I walked in the door at 9, and Karen still wasn't home. My daughters, Emily and Sarah, greeted me happily, but I watched them without truly seeing them, nervous and doubtful. Karen didn't anticipate me being home early. When Karen came in about 2 hours later, she must have noticed my car in the garage and freshened up a bit. I observed a change in her demeanor. She seemed less content than usual. Her first words expressed concern about my unexpected presence. I responded playfully, emphasizing her greeting. Karen, with a slight twitch in her forehead, mentioned that if she had known I would be home early, she would have prepared a nice dinner. She then revealed that she had ordered pizza for the kids and she and Laura had opted for wine and sandwiches downtown. Karen, avoiding eye contact, asked if I remembered Laura from my office and if she had mentioned her before. Despite her dishonesty, I replied affirmatively. Karen sarcastically recalled Laura as a blonde with a large chest, remarking on the trail of admirers she left behind. I couldn't help but think Karen could assemble a football team just by entering a room, not solely due to her effect on married women. Laura, I mused, possessed the allure of a goddess with her remarkable chest. She was about 26 and had started working at the insurance company where Karen worked the previous year. The two became fast friends, and apparently, somewhere down the line, things escalated. At 39, Karen could still turn heads. She was blonde with a beautiful figure and curves in all the right places. only 10 pounds heavier than when we first met. It was still a great package and until recently, exclusively mine. Despite her worried expression, Karen acted calmly. I, on the other hand, could barely stand, so I told her I was tired and going to bed. She gave me a quick peck on the lips as I walked past her and headed upstairs. Perhaps I was mistaken, but I was almost sure I tasted the remnants of her lovemaking games on her lips. I went to bed, but didn't fall asleep. The kids went to bed before me, so when I heard a quiet conversation a few minutes later, I realized Karen was talking to Laura on the phone. It was a short conversation, and a few minutes later, I heard Karen getting into the shower in our master bathroom. Either I had scared her enough that she quit the game and wasn't as careful as before, or she thought I was asleep and wouldn't find out. My heart sank even lower between kids' stuff and housework. I didn't have to deal with Karen much that weekend. She suggested we have a family dinner on Saturday night, but I brushed her off, saying I wasn't in the mood, and left the room, ending the conversation abruptly. Karen probably sensed something was off because I'm hardly ever rude to her. On Monday morning at work, I asked my boss Mark for a day off due to personal reasons. Mark, having gone through a divorce himself about 10 years ago and remarried 5 years ago, had an inkling that something was wrong in the Johnson household. Given the success of my sales trip the week before, he didn't hesitate to approve my request. As I was about to leave his office, he handed me the business card of his divorce lawyer, expressing his regret and sorrow for the unexpected turn in my relationship with Karen. I thanked him, admitting that I had thought Karen and I would last forever. Following Mark's advice, I consulted a lawyer 2 days later. Despite her professional demeanor, she showed genuine concern for my situation and offered gentle guidance. She seemed surprised when I declined to hire a private investigator to gather proof of Karen's infidelity. She explained that in a no-fault state, such evidence might not carry much weight. Her primary concern was the potential impact on visitation rights, although she believed this wouldn't be a major issue. Being around Karen and the girls at home became unbearable. Karen likely noticed this as we barely communicated. The girls, Emily and Sarah, probably sensed something was wrong due to the unusual quietness in the house. I gave Karen plenty of chances to talk, but she never took them. The situation escalated when Karen was served divorce papers at work the following week. Call it petty, but I wanted Karen to feel even a fraction of the pain I was enduring. She was served around 11:03 a.m. because my phone started ringing incessantly at 11:05. I ignored all 15 calls from her and several from unknown numbers, suspecting she was using friends' phones to reach me. Oddly enough, I felt a surge of energy for the first time since discovering her affair with Laura and was having a surprisingly good day. Karen's car was already in the garage when I arrived home at 5:30. She wasted no time confronting me, furious about being served in front of her friends and colleagues. I remained silent until I had put down my things and entered the house. The girls were in the living room engrossed in a movie. I calmly stated that I wanted to ensure she was served alongside her mistress for her own comfort. Karen's fury faded, replaced by tears. I retorted, questioning her knowledge about Laura and their lack of caution. I asked her 2 things: how long and when she had planned to tell me. She admitted it had been about 6 months and insisted they were planning to inform me soon. In less than 30 seconds, Karen's demeanor shifted from angry to defeated. She stumbled to the kitchen table and sat down. I walked over to the drinks cabinet, grabbed a bottle of Buffalo Trace bourbon, poured myself a double, and sat across from her. If looks could kill, she would have been dead within the first 2 seconds. I observed her, and she couldn't tear her eyes away from the table. Quietly, I asked how I couldn't have known about her bisexuality after all this time. She responded that she, too, had only recently discovered it about herself. She insisted it wasn't planned. It just happened. Finally, she looked at me and held my gaze, saying that it shouldn't change anything between us. Karen expressed her continued love for me and the need to explore this new aspect of herself. She asked for my support and more time to explore, stating that it was her turn. I was in shock, questioning whether 6 months wasn't enough for her exploration. I mentioned that if she truly loved me, she would remember our vows and not entertain the idea of exploring at all. I shared my belief that fidelity transcended gender, and she shouldn't have considered such actions. She countered by suggesting that true love could forgive a mistake, to which I argued that once could be a mistake. But 6 months indicated a deliberate decision. I expressed my frustration, emphasizing that love should not give her the license to tear my heart out and jeopardize our family. I asserted that her actions had nothing to do with gender, calling her self-centered. She retorted, insisting that it had a lot to do with being with a woman, and accused me of being a complainer. I confronted her, accusing her of becoming a completely different person before my eyes, and challenged her love for me, claiming she now loved me like a pet rather than a man. I accused her of being in love with Laura, pointing out that I had become second place. When she denied it, I yelled at her to stop lying, asserting that I knew what I saw and knew her better than anyone else. She looked guilty, and it dawned on her that I had seen them together. Despite her quick attempt to salvage the situation, I argued that it didn't change the fact that she loved someone else instead of me. I expressed the sentiment that everything might have been different if it were another man. At least then, I could confront him. She asked if we could be civil, to which I responded uncertainly, acknowledging the painful truth that she had fallen in love with a woman who had become her mistress, ultimately stealing my wife. A few months later, I learned that the children knew nothing about Karen's affair. They thought that Aunt Laura was just a close friend of Mom's. They had both seen the occasional quick kiss and gentle touch, but since Aunt Laura wasn't a man, they didn't think there was anything inappropriate. I found out about this one night when the kids and I went out to dinner, and they mentioned that Laura had been spending more time in the house since I moved out. They seemed to have figured out that Aunt Laura was one of the reasons Karen and I were getting a divorce. Since we live in a no-fault divorce state, our finances were pretty much split down the middle. I had to pay child support, and Karen got the house until the kids went to college. I moved into an apartment about 15 minutes from my old home. I was completely crushed. Karen and I kept in touch through the girls. They were involved in all sorts of activities both in and out of school, and Karen and I tried our best to show them that we were going to support them as much as possible. I don't know why, but Karen fought hard with the divorce, and it dragged on for a year before we finally finalized it. I was polite, nothing more, when I ran into Karen and Laura at my daughter's parties. As for family events, I was always invited, but knowing that Karen would be there, I apologized and avoided them. I knew I was giving up some wonderful family memories, but it took everything I had to keep my composure when she and Laura were around. I did a solo day for the kids to give them birthday and Christmas gifts. As expected, Karen and I each kept our old friends after the divorce. Most of the friends we made together during our marriage stayed with Karen. One of the husbands even told me that many of them felt awkward around me because I lost my wife to another woman. It seemed like they thought I somehow deserved it. Some of our female friends almost said as much. I didn't argue or try to keep those friends, believing the saying that tough times reveal who your real friends are. I chose not to date much in the years following the split. My heart wasn't ready for it, and I didn't feel the need for much social interaction. After a year of being alone, I went to the local animal shelter and adopted a German Shepherd who was about 3 years old. I asked the staff to show me the 3 dogs that had been there the longest. The one I chose had been at the shelter since he was a puppy. After being rejected over and over, he had become a quiet, reclusive animal with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen. We were like soulmates in our shared sense of rejection. His name was Max, not a cute or quirky name, just Max. Max and I understood each other. The first thing he did when I brought him into my apartment was sniff around, then climb onto the couch and curl up next to me. He was great with the girls when they came over on weekends, but I think Max preferred it when it was just us. He loved to walk and ride with me, and we could talk about almost anything. Although Max was mostly silent during these conversations, his attentive ears and eyes told me he was listening to every word. A few years later, my oldest daughter, Emily, met a guy from Boston in college and got married. I was doing well in my engineering career, so I could afford to give her the wedding of her dreams. I couldn't have been prouder as I walked her down the aisle. After the service, though, she scolded me for messing up my one line. I realized during the rehearsal that my voice might crack under pressure, and sure enough, instead of saying, "her mother and I simply said, I admitted to almost choking on my words. Sitting beside Karen in the front row, she leaned toward me and quietly remarked that it was embarrassing, and I knew it. Laura, seated next to Karen, leaned forward and glared at me. I discreetly told her to forget it with just my lips, checking if the pastor noticed our exchange. Wedding ceremonies always stir up memories for me. Initially, I looked back on my wedding day with fondness. This lasted about 30 seconds before I mentally pictured Karen and Laura together in the restaurant when I discovered them. When I came back to reality, Karen was looking at me sadly. She blushed and quickly looked away. It seemed I wasn't the only one reminiscing. Although I tried not to watch, I noticed Karen and Laura seemed to be having a great time with Emily and her new husband Jerry, and almost everyone else. I realized I was one of the few single people over 50 in the room. Feeling sorry for myself, I went to the open bar and ordered a shot of 18-year-old Irish whiskey. Taking my glass, I sat down at my table and quietly patted myself on the back for hosting such a grand event. 3 years later, I was about to be the father of the bride again when my youngest, Sarah, had her boyfriend walk her down the aisle. This time, I decided not to go it alone and made a real effort to meet new people. Returning home from a 3-day trip out of state 3 weeks later, I stopped at a small bar restaurant about an hour from my apartment. Though I usually avoided such places due to my dislike of country western music, they were advertising pork BBQ, so I had to stop. The food was excellent, and as the DJ started playing music around 8 p.m., I looked around for someone to chat with. Just then, a 30-year-old black woman with the face of an angel walked in. She was stunning, and I wondered why a single young black woman would be at this bar. Then again, there I was, a lonely, older white guy. I knew she was probably too young for me, but I motioned to the bartender to put her drinks on my tab. He told her that her drink was paid for and gestured in my direction. She walked over to my table to thank me, and I invited her to sit down. To my surprise, she did, and introduced herself as Ruby. We had a pleasant evening, and Ruby suggested we go to her place, catching me off guard. Without hesitation, we headed for the door when a man in a cowboy hat approached Ruby and kissed her cheek. I stopped in my tracks, and Ruby reassured me, introducing him as her husband Sam. She asked if he could join, and Sam grinned, mentioning their open relationship. I felt uncomfortable, stating that the situation was wrong and a sign of a messed-up generation. Raising my hands, signaling them to stop, I left alone for my car. In another attempt to find companionship, I turned to my church. Amanda, a 50-year-old divorcee with long black hair, a 34B chest, long legs, and a big smile, and I got along well. After a few dates, we went back to my apartment and became intimate. However, during our encounter, she began muttering her ex-husband Jim's name. It escalated as she screamed it during subsequent climaxes. I stopped immediately, explaining that I wasn't Jim. She expressed genuine anger and questioned why I had stopped. In silence, I drove her home, and there was no fifth date. For my next dating attempt, I invited a coworker over for an evening of food and dancing. Olivia, a 42-year-old divorcee who had separated from her husband almost 5 years ago, was a blonde with a slightly larger chest and curvier figure than average. We had been friends at work for about 10 years, and by this point, she had heard my sad story, and I had heard hers. Our great evening turned into several wonderful ones, and we genuinely enjoyed each other's company, even before our first time making love. Excited about the upcoming wedding, I asked Olivia to be my date. She hesitated, worried about the family dynamics with my ex-wife, Karen. I jokingly told her that she would need the approval of Max, my discerning 45-pound German Shepherd mix. I explained that if Max didn't like her, she wouldn't be able to come to the wedding with me. Olivia found this peculiar and called me a strange person. After passing Max's test the following week, Olivia agreed to be my date, which delighted my daughters. They were thrilled I wouldn't be attending alone. Karen, however, seemed unhappy with this arrangement, constantly giving me dirty looks. I ignored her opinions, but it bothered Olivia, who could sense Karen's dislike. At the rehearsal dinner, I found Karen alone and decided to confront her, asking what her problem was. Karen responded with sarcasm, expressing disdain for Olivia and questioning if I was now dating Girl Scouts. I noted that jealousy didn't suit her, reminding her that Olivia, Karen, and Laura were all the same age. I teased her, saying she had traded me for a younger female version. She responded with a reluctant smile. A year later, Olivia became my second wife, and life went on. I had completely forgotten I was on the bone marrow registry until I got a call one day. They informed me that after 30 years, I was a match for someone. Thrilled at the chance to save a life, I knew the bone marrow extraction would be inconvenient, but my desire to help outweighed that. Further testing was required, and if it went well, the extraction would be scheduled for 2 weeks later. I agreed to proceed. While not very religious, I do believe in God, and there's a saying that God works in mysterious ways. I never thought much about it until 4 days later, during a phone call with my oldest daughter, Emily. Sarah and I avoid discussing Karen's life, but Emily mentioned that bone marrow had been found for Aunt Laura, and they were involved. Through Emily, I sent my best wishes to Laura and Karen, expressing that despite the pain they caused me, I didn't wish them harm. Emily reminded me that I could call them myself as an adult. I acknowledged this, but explained that the less I talked to them, the less likely I was to say something I'd regret. Emily encouraged me to come to terms with the divorce, noting that I'd been happily married to Olivia for almost 2 years. I agreed, admitting that while I no longer hated Karen, she wasn't on my Facebook friends list. I decided to send Karen flowers with a card wishing her well. Later, as I was ordering the bouquet, a thought struck me. Bone marrow matches are rare, and the coincidence of Laura finding a match around the same time as me seemed too convenient. Aware of the anonymity in the donation process, I contacted my registry liaison, pretending to be optimistic and inquiring about the likelihood of my match living in the same city. She hesitated and admitted it was the first time someone had identified their match. Frustrated, I realized I was going to donate bone marrow to Laura. Angered by the situation, I reflected on how she stole my wife, never apologized, and now expected me to save her life. I decided it wouldn't happen. 2 days later, I called the registry back and refused to make the donation. The receptionist was shocked and almost in tears. She asked if there was a specific reason for my refusal, explaining that while I had the right to refuse, it was almost never done and would cause significant distress at the registry. I apologized for causing trouble, but insisted it was in my best interest to decline. She expressed her disappointment and told me that if I changed my mind soon, I should call her back. Olivia was furious when I told her I had turned down the donation. I didn't tell her who the donation was for. She just knew that I had backed out of saving someone's life. She practically screamed at me, questioning why I would change my mind after initially wanting to help. It was the first time I heard Olivia use strong language. I decided to be honest with her, explaining that I wouldn't have informed Karen or Laura about the donation if I had a choice. She was unimpressed by my reasoning, accusing me of denying Laura a chance at life out of revenge. I clarified that it wasn't revenge, emphasizing my efforts to have as little to do with Karen and Laura as possible since they both hurt me deeply. Olivia asked if they knew about her involvement, and I assured her everything was done anonymously and that I only found out by luck. As I shared this, Olivia's expression softened. She argued that I couldn't refuse the opportunity to save someone's life, emphasizing the moral weight of holding Laura's fate in my hands. Olivia whispered that I was too kind-hearted to withhold help and that the guilt would eventually consume me. I disagreed, stating that I wouldn't feel guilty because Laura and Karen had shattered my heart. I emphasized that they would never know it was me. Olivia expressed concern about the hope they had and how my decision might have ruined it for them. Our disagreements continued, and it felt like we were growing apart as a couple. Our differences seemed more pronounced than ever. At one point, she questioned my Christian charity, to which I responded by asking if I should blindly give to someone who had caused me so much pain. She called me ridiculous. I explained that Laura and Karen had torn my heart out and turned my world upside down, and I wasn't ready to simply shrug off the pain and help them after all these years. I reminded her that Karen had been with Laura longer than she had been with me and suggested she deal with it. Olivia insisted they had made a decision, and I quietly replied that they could live or not. I was indifferent to their fate. A few days later, on a Saturday afternoon, I left the room, informing Olivia that I was going to the range to blow off some steam. She reminded me to be back before dinner, as the girls were coming over and didn't want me to smell like gunpowder, instructing me to take a shower before we ate. I headed to the shooting range, where I unleashed my frustration on the target, firing 500 rounds from my 9mm. For some reason, shooting always relaxes me. I think it's because you have to concentrate so hard, and when you stop, your body goes into a relaxed mode. At least that's my theory, and I stand by it. I definitely smelled like gunpowder when I got home, so I headed straight for the shower. Glancing at the dining table, I noticed it was set for 6 people, and the aroma of Olivia's cooking filled the air. She's a great cook, and I was hoping for her famous roasted potatoes instead of mashed. After showering, I poured myself a glass of rye whiskey and brought Olivia a glass of wine. She seemed a bit nervous, which I chalked up to wanting dinner to be perfect for the girls and their husbands. I kissed her on the lips. I was in the living room reading on the computer when the door opened. Instead of my daughter's husbands, I saw Karen and a tired-looking Laura with them. I wasn't happy to see either of them and shot Olivia a glare as I stood to greet everyone. I kissed both girls but said nothing to Karen or Laura. I noticed they greeted Olivia warmly. There was a lot of whispering, and I quickly realized that Olivia had orchestrated this little intervention. It felt more like an ambush, considering I was the only one unaware of the meeting. I thought about leaving but decided it was time to speak up. First, I had to endure the excuse that it was just a nice meal with family and friends. Laura's illness dominated the conversation, although I took no part in it, sitting with what I hoped was a thoughtful expression on my face. I suppose dinner and dessert were good, but I couldn't really tell. Being the good host, I provided everyone with drinks and moved into the living room. After a moment of silence, I decided it was time to express my thoughts. I questioned who would speak first: the woman who betrayed my trust to arrange the meeting, the woman who broke my heart years ago but now believed I owed her a favor, or the woman who took a married woman from her unsuspecting loving husband and now needed help for a chance at life. As I spoke, I looked at each face in turn, and none of the women could meet my gaze. Olivia seemed eager when I called her name, but my eldest daughter, Emily, took the initiative to speak. She acknowledged my lingering anger toward Mom and Aunt Laura, but criticized my refusal to donate bone marrow as childish and petty, stating it was beneath me. Emily argued that seeking revenge by denying someone a chance at life was wrong, emphasizing that it involved a person's life, not a frivolous act. I took a sip of rye whiskey and cleared my throat. Shaking my head slightly, I expressed my anger and stated that every action in life has consequences. I noted that Karen and Laura never expected such severe consequences, but were now trying to make their problem mine. I highlighted the unexpected opportunity to make a difference in the life of someone who had wronged me, despite their belief that it was driven by revenge. I suggested it might also be a way for me to regain some self-respect. After all, how much self-respect could I have if I helped the woman who stole my wife survive? I pointed out that none of them considered the fact that if Laura were a man, they would likely think my decision was justified. But it didn't matter to me that Laura was a woman. She was a wife-stealing homewrecker. She knew what she was doing was wrong. Laura stared intensely at the carpet, while Karen reached over and gently squeezed her hand. I asserted that my decision wasn't driven by revenge, but by hatred. I despised Laura and had no intention of assisting her. I highlighted my minimal communication with her during the 17 years she was with Karen. Karen, holding back tears, asked if I hated her enough to deprive someone of a chance to live. Karen tried to appeal to my past love for her, suggesting that helping Laura would be a noble thing to do and a matter of honor. I retorted, expressing skepticism about Karen's understanding of honor. I bluntly called her out and stated she had no right to lecture me on what honor is. My voice rose, and I tried my best not to tell them all, including Olivia, to get out of my life. I took a few deep breaths, but Olivia, sensing I wasn't angry enough, quietly reminded me that I was a good person who always did the right thing. She emphasized that turning away now was wrong, and that I would never be able to live with myself if I did. Emily jumped in, reminding me of the values I had instilled in her and Sarah, to always do the right thing, even when it was hard. I acknowledged this, but asserted that my decision was to avoid any regrets or sleepless nights. Suddenly, Laura, with tears in her eyes, pleaded with me not to let her die. She admitted the hurt she had caused, but stressed the grim reality of her situation, with slim chances of survival without my donation. Her eyes were desperate, making it clear that asking for my help was incredibly difficult for her. I looked into those haunted eyes and made my decision clear. No. I didn't say, "I'm sorry," because I wasn't. I wouldn't do anything to help her. Laura took my answer better than Karen, who burst into tears. Olivia went over to comfort them, whispering, "I'll try to talk to him." She didn't realize at that moment that she had jeopardized our marriage. I had to think long and hard about whether I could trust her again. Grabbing my car keys, I walked out the door while 5 women cried. I didn't return for 3 days and ignored all the calls from Olivia and the kids. When I finally returned, the house was dark. A quick look around showed me that Olivia had left. Some of her clothes were gone, but most things were untouched. I packed a few things, taking most of my belongings, and left my wedding ring on the kitchen table. 3 days later at work, I received a call from Olivia. She was upset that our relationship was ending because I refused to save someone's life. I expressed my shock at being married to someone who had betrayed my trust so completely. I suggested that if anyone was seeking revenge, it wasn't me, but perhaps a higher power. I referenced the biblical saying, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord." I criticized her actions and remarked that she had really let me down. Laura passed away 2 months after our divorce, and I learned about it through the local newspaper obituary. I hadn't followed her case, and my daughters hadn't kept me informed. Despite the estrangement, I stood firm in my decision not to help Laura. My decision was right for me, and I never lost sleep over not giving Laura my bone marrow. The bone marrow registry removed me from their list, and I was fine with that. Max wasn't thrilled with any of the women I'd brought home over the past year or so, but that was okay. At 62, I wasn't looking for another wife. Surprisingly, I was still enjoying companionship. Eligible women outnumbered eligible men about 4-1, and if her health was good, there was a good chance my girlfriend was ready for some fun. Of course, we couldn't frolic too much. Neither of us wanted to break a hip. But more often than not, we enjoyed a nice evening together. I jokingly called my companions my handsome old singletons. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family for over 4 years when Sarah called to tell me that Karen had died a few days ago. She thought I should know and invited me to the funeral. We had 15 good years together and 2 kids, so I figured I should at least show up. Maybe I could improve my relationship with the girls. I sat in the back alone. It was a nice ceremony. After the funeral, I approached the girls and their families. I received shy hugs from the girls, firm handshakes from their husbands, and shy greetings from my 3 grandchildren. We went to a nearby restaurant to talk. After a few minutes, Emily abruptly questioned why I had let Aunt Laura die. I noted how the conversation hadn't changed after 4 years, referring to Laura as a wife thief. I asserted that this would be the final discussion on the matter. Changing the topic, I pointed out a young man at the bar and suggested a hypothetical scenario where he kissed Emily. Her husband Jerry immediately said he would deal with him. When asked about a potential affair, he stated the man would already be dead. I drew a parallel, saying that since the man would be dead, Jerry wouldn't have to worry about donating bone marrow if he fell sick. Jerry agreed, and I clarified that my decision not to save Laura's life was partly because she was a woman, which may have been a mistake. I asserted that I wouldn't have saved the life of a man involved with my wife, or the one who stole her. Jerry agreed, understanding dawning on him, and he looked around, seeing the realization in everyone's eyes. I quietly shared that I wasn't proud of my decision, but wasn't ashamed either, explaining that Laura didn't deserve my compassion for what she did. Sarah questioned how I could withhold compassion if I ever loved her mother. I confessed to having loved her mother deeply, but when she broke my heart, much of that love turned to hate. I acknowledged that I was just a man, not the monster her mother had portrayed. I expressed that things didn't turn out well for her mother, and that karma eventually caught up with her and Laura. Tears filled the eyes of the other adults, while the children looked confused and worried. I recognized that it would take time for all of us to come to terms with the situation, and suggested that we not dwell on the past as life goes on.